Okay, welcome everyone. This is the third in a series of webinars sponsored by the Oregon Early Childhood Inclusion Collaborative at the Teaching Research Institute. And we are also joined today by some of our family partners from All Born In and the Northwest Down Syndrome Association. So I'd like to just, Angela, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself, and then I'll introduce the Center on Inclusion folks that are on the line.
Sure. Hello, I am the Executive Director of the Northwest Down Syndrome Association. We do cross-disability work as well as Down syndrome-specific work, and I represent about 1,500 families. And probably one of my most important qualifications for this call is that I've got two sons, and my 14-year-old, he's the drummer of the family, and he has Down syndrome. So he taught me a lot about early intervention and what ways that I wanted to be communicated with, and I've learned a lot from families and professionals along the way.
I'm Patty Blasco, and I am part of the Center on Inclusion and particularly work on a federal project called Project PEPI, which designs activities, enhancements, and help community college faculty redesign their coursework so that they are using inclusion sort of as a framework for early childhood classes. And would other Center on Inclusion faculty please introduce yourself? I think it's just you, Robin.
Perfect. Hi, I'm Robin Lopez-Melton, and I also work here at the Center on Inclusion and Early Childhood Education at the Teaching Research Institute at Western Oregon University. And mostly I work on Oregon's quality rating and improvement system, but I do a little bit of work on the other projects as well. And I'm just kind of here to do a little bit of presenting, but also I'm really excited to hear Angela talk and learn a little bit myself as well.
Great, thank you. So again, as I said, this is the third in the series of webinars that the Center on Inclusion developed for this year. And so it's June, and this is our final webinar until the fall season. And just a little bit about the Oregon Early Childhood Inclusion Collaborative, which sponsors these webinars. It is a sub-grant from the Oregon Department of Education, and the goal is to enhance and expand inclusion opportunities for young children with disabilities. And so there's a component of bringing together resources as well as providing some training and technical assistance out to counties. And so we, as you can see, the lead agencies in the system. And this is, I think, the third year that OECIC has been doing this type of work. So what are the webinar outcomes and objectives? The outcome is to gain understanding and awareness of working in partnership with families and to understand the role of families and as well as supporting inclusion for children in everyday environments. And particularly, we're so delighted that Angela is with us to share perspectives of family members in terms of inclusion. An important point to remember is that inclusion is also part of IDEA 2004. All children deserve a free and appropriate public education. And the law specifically grants rights and safeguards for families. And states are assisted in providing education and also assisted with professional development. So, as I said, part of what we do in collaboration with the Oregon Department of Education is to work on helping to promote and give technical assistance around inclusion activities throughout the state. There are also ways of assessing and assuring that these efforts continue through monitoring as well as in terms of compliance. And I'm going to pause there and let Angela or Robin, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Just that what we see is that across the state, how that's embraced varies, district to district, place to place, and we know what the intent is at the federal level, but then that isn't always the experience. So we have some places where there's some incredible best practices, other places where it's just emerging, or people are having different experiences in different parts of our state.
Mhm. Yes, and that is an issue, and it's a national issue because the states have a way of interpreting what they mean by a free and appropriate education, and so there are some differences.
So that's me then.
That's you, Robin.
So I guess just a reminder, when we're talking about people, we all know that everyone is different, and these are just some best practices when we're talking about talking with parents, talking with families, talking with other people, talking with other professionals, just making sure that we're always sensitive to cultural, linguistic, and socioeconomic concerns when we're collaborating and communicating with families. That's kind of a base. Whatever we talk about from here on out, we just want to kind of keep these principles in mind when we're talking about communication and partnering with families. It's always important to, at any possible moment, share the information in the primary language of the family and have a knowledge of the language spoken in the child's primary environment. Very, very important. I was at a evaluation for ECSE with a small child, and they were using an interpreter. So the child was speaking Spanish, and the interpreter was saying mi hermanita, which can mean my little sister, but also it can be a term of endearment, and it's actually his older sister. So the way that the interpreter was interpreting it was that he was getting it wrong, like he didn't understand what older or younger was, and really he was trying to say, like, my sissy. And so I just think that's a good, important piece when we're talking about making sure things are done in the primary language of the family, and that there's a cultural understanding of the language as well, not just an understanding of the words of the language. And then also always remembering verbal versus nonverbal language. It's really hard for me to do these kind of webinars. I kind of want to see you guys smile or move around, just because I enjoy nonverbal cues. But just keeping in mind that those are also very cultural and family oriented as well. So.
Very good points. Yes, and I also like to know people are seeing what I'm seeing.
Yes.
And this is just to set a framework that the DEC, Division for Early Childhood, had originally done a position statement on inclusion. And I know some of you have already seen this, but I think it's important as a framework that it's a value that supports the rights of all children, regardless of abilities, to participate actively in natural settings within their communities. Natural settings are those in which the children would spend time had he or she not had a disability. And so, again, that's from the Division for Early Childhood position statement on inclusion. The defining features of inclusion that are also in that statement are that access, participation, and supports. And so when they talk about access, they're not just talking about environments. We're also talking about learning opportunities, activities, as well as the settings and the environment. Participation also means that children are accommodated and supported to participate fully. And supports are really kind of around not just supports for the child, but also supports from a systems level perspective, so that teachers have ongoing professional development around understanding inclusion, that resources and policies support collaboration, and that funding policies support inclusion. So again, I'll pause if Robin and Angela would like to comment.
Yeah, for me, on the DEC statement, it just seems a little odd to say regardless of abilities. there's just something in that. I mean, I know when we get to wordsmithing, it's always a difficult thing to come up with that mission statement. But, you know, in our minds, every child has abilities, and it kind of is odd to put regardless of abilities. I know what the meaning of it is, but for us, that framing disability as a natural part of the human experience, I think I would have lost regardless of abilities. The rights of all children says it to me without regardless of abilities. So that's just my philosophical quibble.
Mhm. Robin? Okay.
Nope, I'm good.
Good. Okay. Okay, so in terms of benefits for family partnerships, and this is some things that were from the literature as well as the track training from Center on Inclusion. Partnerships imply a shared interest and mutual supports. So again, it's reciprocal and it's interactive. Partnerships involve positive engagement for children as well as adults and for learning. And partnerships really, it's important to help families become better advocates for themselves and their children. So that part of what we do is really supporting families. And Angela, you can speak to this better than I can, so I would like to give you an opportunity to address that.
I think that just any time that we're building capacity, I mean, the primary person in the child's life is the parent. And what we know is that so many people come in and out of the lives of people whose children experience disabilities that any time that we make an investment that increases the capacity of that family to feel successful in their parenting and on the goals that they have for their child, that's a great investment. So I just feel pretty strongly that that's a primary place to be thinking about.
I was just going to say that really hit home for me, what Angela just said, because I think sometimes we as therapists and providers think that we have the answers and the end-all and be-all, and we forget those parents are going to be parents from start to finish, and we may be in and out of the child's and family's lives, and we need to understand that, you know, we are just a moment in time where they're in it in the lifetime, and that we need to help those families be advocates for themselves as well as their children. So that really hit home for me, Angela.
Great.
Yeah, I appreciate that. The other thing is, for me, from a very early age, my child being able to make a contribution. So I mean, there's a lot that's already said here, but, you know, a child being asked to give something, a child being asked to contribute something is how we get to be in community. And sometimes children with disabilities don't get asked to contribute. And, you know, our family values don't change. I have two sons. Both of my sons are expected to volunteer. Both of my sons are expected to do chores. So in our expectations, there has to be the support for every child to make contributions is important to us.
I agree. So, again, what about professionals in this relationship and in inclusive settings? So partnerships show respect and value of knowledge, faith, and strengths of the family. And this was a quote that I saw on a parent website, and I really liked it. It's not parent education. It's about advocacy and supporting parents in leadership roles. Enabling professionals to implement evidence-based practices that are sensitive to cultural, linguistic, socioeconomic, and gender issues in collaboration with families, and that's what professionals should be doing. And that we are compliant with relevant state and federal regulations specific to meeting the needs of children with diverse abilities and their families in inclusive settings. So, again, those are just some ideas around what professionals add to this partnership. Others like to join in?
Well, I would just say that that number 2 is important, because the number of people that do come into your life that are going to educate you versus come into your life and say, you know, just the way you're holding your baby is great, and the fact that you're breastfeeding that baby, you're doing incredible things already, and here's another thing that might be useful to you. that's a different way of talking to us and thinking about our education, rather than the feeling that we're an empty vessel that have to be filled by all the professionals. And, you know, with the internet now, I think that a lot of families put themselves on a rack of all of these things that they have to learn, or they're not good enough. So, you know, compliments and telling us what we're doing well, especially in childcare settings, you know, noticing the things that we do well and complimenting those is really important to the spirit of families and to the energy that they have for the work that they do.
Angela has given me permission to share with you some parents' perspective from a video that was put together by the All Born In group. So again, Angela, do you want to just introduce this? And we're going to play about the first 3 minutes.
Yeah, we All Born In refers to a conference we started 8 years ago, and it comes from the notion that we're all born into the world the same way. We're naked, new, full of potential. And then why do we keep finding ways to push different people out? And then as a result of some of that work, families, we created a cohort that supports each other to get ready for transition to an inclusive kindergarten. And one of the most important questions to ask a family is, what are your dreams? And to encourage them to have big dreams. And, you know, this is just some families at the beginning of this talking about that. But the resource is available online on our website if people want to use it for trainings. It's 20 for parents and 30 for professionals. But I think this will just give an introduction to a few families and what some of their dreams are.
My child's name is Garrett Say, and he's 5 years old.
My daughter's name is Eden, and she's 4 years old.
My son's name is August, and he turns 5 today.
Eden will enter kindergarten this fall.
He'll be entering kindergarten in fall 2012.
My child is entering into kindergarten fall of 2012.
My hopes for Eden in school are that she can go and have fun and be with the friends she's already made through preschool and friends that she's yet to meet.
He'll make friends, he'll get a great education.
Well, I hope for him to be included and make friends and be happy and be safe and learn a lot and thrive and be part of his community.
My fear for my son in kindergarten is that he will be looked upon as his label and not for what he can achieve and what he can become.
One of my fears is that she'll be judged before she's met, whether by teachers or administrators.
That he'll be left out of things.
That people will not meet her and see her for her, but judge her for things that are out of her control.
This is my son Garrett, and he has autism.
This is my son August. He has a terminal deletion of chromosome 7.
This is my daughter Eden, and she has Down syndrome.
Could somebody explain to me the benefits of segregating people? Can we have a look at where did the good stuff come when we segregated folk? We've learnt more. We've learnt that that didn't work.
Segregation in this context leads to social isolation of children with disabilities, which carries over their entire life.
One of the great leaders of advocacy talks about loneliness being the biggest disability.
And if I was to say what's the hierarchy of need for children, belonging would be first on the list.
I think kids, if they don't feel that they're a part of something, they develop a loneliness that just can't be fixed.
Any comments?
Or questions? That made me want to watch the rest of it.
Definitely makes, yes. I can
and the rest of it has, it's really about the civil and human rights to belong, and I think it is a good resource. But, as I was watching that, I was thinking one of the most important things is when somebody has, like the person that looked after Daniel when he was 2, they had no idea how important they were to me in terms of they accepted my son and he was just part of a regular setting with other kids. So the vision of him being included, in a way, what you can be offering in those childcare settings is an inclusion resume. By the time it came around to kindergarten, there was no way I was thinking about a self-contained setting because he'd been successfully included in childcare, in a preschool, and why wouldn't he be included in a regular kindergarten class? So some of those people who didn't have incredible access to education or whatever were very, very important in our family's story.
Yes. And I think that's an excellent example. I think I shared with you, Angela, years ago, one of my graduate students put together what she called a portfolio to travel with a child with autism because she was very concerned that all the work they had done would sort of somewhat be forgotten and not move on with him when he moved on to kindergarten. And I always thought that was such a good idea because it not only does it show, well, here are ways to get to know me, and here are ways that we can think about the skills that I've gained, and it really comes from a strengths perspective. So it's very positive, and I like that idea of an inclusion resume arriving at the kindergarten. Yeah. All right. Well, from that perspective, then I would just like to just share with you a little bit more about what we know from research about partnerships with families. And again, at this point in the conversation, I just really want to open it up to discussion, and please feel free to jump in and discuss as we go along. These are professional modules that were done on working with families. Is anyone familiar with the Connect modules?
No. Yes.
Yes, Patty, is that you?
Yes, actually, we just were introduced to it. We went to the National Inclusion Institute that they held in North Carolina.
Yes. Well,
yeah, we sent a team of folks down there, and that was one of the sub conversations that we had was the Connect modules.
Excellent. Well, here we have a link for you of the module on families, which was developed with the Beach Center for families of children with disabilities at the University of Kansas. And they also have some tools on describing effective practices for communicating with professionals and families. So that link is there, as well as it's describing effective practices for family professional partnerships. And again, this is an excellent resource. It's easy to do. If you are working as a director of a child care center or you're working with other staff, this is an easy way for them to just get on and get some good information about understanding family professional partnerships. They use videos and they do enactment of, for example, say a parent professional meeting where the professional might have an agenda and is not listening to what the parent is saying. So there's some really good examples of parent-professional partnerships for you to see. Of course, we're promoting our Center on Inclusion. We also have resources around inclusion, family-centered services, and collaborative ISFPs. We believe that families should be involved to the extent they'd like to be involved in planning, intervention, transitions, and we believe in helping families link to resources. So that's just our website that we're providing. Another idea that we wanted to share today was this idea of mindful conversations. So maybe Robin and Angela, you could talk a little bit about some of the previous things we've discussed.
I was just going to ask Angela, if you were talking to someone in the field who has never worked with a child with special needs and is worried about it, and you as a parent or you as someone who's worked with lots of parents, what would be the advice that you could give them? How can they get involved? And what really is, we're talking about the benefits of partnering with parents and families.
Yeah.
What are those? Could you just talk to that for a little bit?
Sure, but I think that really it's like sometimes there's a false separation between what do parents need when we work and encourage them and what do staff need. So the same as, how I voiced what I want encouraging with, when I was looking for childcare providers, I had a son that was 5 years old. I'd already been through different childcare scenarios. I knew what represented quality to me. So I went without Daniel to the first time that I went to a childcare provider, and I was looking at how she cared for the children, how rich the environment was, what she did right. And then when I spoke to her and, we got to the point of me telling her about my child, I started by saying, I would like my child to come here because you are really interested in literacy and you're very playful, and the children seem to feel really safe. And I went through my list of all the things that she did well that would support my child. And then I talked about Daniel, and I encourage parents to do a sheet and just get a piece of paper, put a line down the middle, what works, what doesn't work. And that's where we can give a little of our expertise, because really when you drill down into it, the first thing she said was, I don't know anything about Down syndrome. And I was able to say, well, you know a whole lot about 2-year-olds, and he's a 2-year-old first. And, now the other things you need to know are things like some really silly little things, like if you just give him a piece of string cheese without breaking it into 2 pieces to hand it to him, he'll melt down. Pretty specific information. And, just what things don't work for him, what things do work for him, what things make him safe, what things don't make him safe. So I think if people could just ask some simple questions of families, they would get some of the information that they needed, because what we're talking about is how does some of the needs have to be tweaked for this child. His mobility was different, and he wore orthotics and some of those things. But once she knew what his stamina level was, knew that we expected that it would be good for him to pull himself up so he could play at the sand table or whatever, then the anxiety could come down, because she knew, I'm not going to hurt this child by letting him pull himself up and join in the play. That's what his mum wants. That's what Daniel needs. So some of that, what works, what doesn't work, the families could help with that. But a good childcare provider's got 90% of what we need is the big message that I'd want to put out there.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think as well, just the partnership and the communication, being able to keep that door open. I think one of the things that was most challenging for me was around behavior. Like my child, it was a lot later before he was able to be verbal. So how can you support him with some visuals and whatever? And that's where I really appreciate, I don't want to be a speech therapist, a physical therapist, an occupational therapist. Right. So if a family can access some of their resources and bring them in, I acknowledge completely that what we need are, supported people. So I had my OT look at that setting, and they brought in some different things to go around the paintbrushes. They brought in a slant board for when he was drawing. Just some simple stuff that didn't get in the way, and I actually found that some other kids liked using those things. So another thing for me was to try and have more than one of the things that we brought in where possible, like pencil grips or whatever. But I think if they know there's someone they can ask questions of, and it's okay to ask questions, that's a gift.
So what I'm hearing you say is that you don't have to be an expert. You just have to be an expert on one child. You just have to learn to be an expert on that one child and then the next child, just like you have to be an expert on every single child that walks in the door.
Yeah, and I think that people, I mean, there are people in childcare that have been doing it for years. They've got far more experience than I have, and within those years and those experiences of the different ages and developmental stages, they've probably got a lot to teach me as my first assumption, not that my child is so from another planet that they don't know how to start, you know?
Yep.
And I think as well, as a parent of a child with a disability, we get brought into a culture where everybody is going to tell us everything that our children can't do. And when there's ever an assessment, it's like, it's so crushing, like that 3-year assessment where it's like, you know, you've been feeling like you've been doing a great job and, you know, Daniel's finally walking and whatever else. And then that assessment comes and it's like, he's functioning at a 14-month level doing this, and he's functioning at a 12-month level doing this and this. Well, there's within the childcare setting that people can't use a strength-based way of thinking about our children, and it would be, you know, much more useful to me to say, you know, 6 months ago, Daniel wasn't able to walk independently, and now he can walk across the room here, you know, or to frame things in a way that points out growth without pointing out deficit all the time is really important. And people first language as well, which is something that isn't intuitive, you know, finding ways that are respectful to talk about our children. And I think parents don't always know those ways of speaking about their children. And we get trained into, like, whenever we meet someone new, we go through the list of everything that our child can't do and everything that's wrong with them. And, you know, that's really damaging if your child keeps hearing that over time. And I very early on decided if I needed to have those conversations, it would not be within earshot of my child. It's not helpful to him. There are times to get services or to access things that we do need to use that language, but it's only in certain places, and the rest of the world should be looking at what my child can do, not what he can't do.
No, I really agree, and I think that relationships have to be strength-based in order to be effective, and that, you know, come on, this has been years that we've talked about. We really need to be looking at functional ways of doing assessment and evaluation, and that we're looking at what the child is doing and how they're making progress, and not going back to some standardized test that says, oh, well, they're not here yet. So I think that the one good thing about Oregon is it really has moved more towards curriculum-based assessment and towards looking at overall what makes sense for that child in functional assessment as opposed to standardized assessments that don't really tell us a whole lot.
One thing that we haven't talked about that I do know is kind of sometimes like an elephant in the room. Some of our children are going to have challenging behaviors, and that, I think, is still an underdeveloped resource. There's not as much support for that. And in my family, you know, being able to access people who can kind of decode behavior as communication and give some support to providers has been really important, because let's be honest, that's why kids get kicked out of preschool.
Right.
I think, like, for instance, you know, one thing that we know for my child, he had some sensory issues, and he had some things where he needed to be able to see visual ways to know what was going on in his day and what was expected next. And once we had those pieces, then his behavior improved. And it was, you know, we could have judged him and said, you know, he's pushing kids and he's being aggressive, therefore he needs to go. Or we could say, he's pushing kids and he's being aggressive. What is it that he isn't getting in this environment that he needs? And when somebody came and helped me with that, we started using a visual timer and visuals for some routines, and he did fine. So I I would like to see ways that people that embrace our children could access more support if behaviors become a challenge. I don't know if I have resources to suggest around that, but that's been a resource that I've had a problem putting my hand on and my fingers on, you know?
Well, actually, there's a couple of things. There are some great resources out there from the Center on Foundations for Social Emotional Development in Early Childhood. But I always think of the ABCs, and that is you look at antecedent of behavior, you look at behavior, and you look at consequences, and that's how you make some decisions then, and your example was perfect.
Well, I think I would just like to offer my thanks for anyone that is in a quest to understand how to meet all children's needs better, and to also say I believe that anyone that's embraced my child's need has become a better provider because of it. And that, you know, that's the gift in difference. The gift is that we increase our capacity to embrace and be, you know, welcoming of the diversity in our world. And I think that that's truly the work of this century for us. And I'm just very grateful for anyone that is trying to learn more and think together with us. And that's really, again, how things change when we can be in conversation and thinking together. So I appreciate very much the opportunities that today gave us.
Thank you, Patty.
Okay, thank you, everyone, and thank you for participating.